Hello and welcome to The Pouch, the unshaded patio of podcasts that takes a not-so-serious look at the week in Australian news and politics. I'm Greg. I'll open up my winter electricity bill when my lights come back on Savage.
That's a good one. And I'm Jake. If this New South Wales coalition killing koala bill isn't called the Blinky Bill, I'll be really disappointed, farr-wharton. On today's episode, we talk flags, borders, class actions, and so much more.
And Jake, while we're as snug as a bug in this proverbial rug, I want to know why one nation has a stubby cooler for their brand and we don't. And follow-up question, is orange ever actually a good colour for a stubby cooler?
Well, spoiler alert, we have way better things, Greg. And to the second question, orange is the best choice for a stubby cooler.
All right, let me jot that down so that we can maybe make some orange stubby coolers for the Pouch podcast for Christmas.
Well, just call it Pouch Nation.
Pouch Nation. Oh, yeah. Jake, these are good. You know, it's a good idea when it goes on the left-hand side of my notebook,
and it has a square next to it, so you can tick it off as you get it.
Yeah. Well, there's 4 sections to my notebook. There's one which just is like really good ideas that Jake says. Then there's bad ideas. Then there's actual things I'm going to say during the show. Okay. And then the 4th section is like just where I write something down if I look like I haven't written anything down for a while.
I love it. You've really thought that out.
And people are just like, oh, Greg, why does Greg have a notepad? So every now and then I just sort of, I'll draw a star or something like that. Yeah. But they'll go, oh, Greg's got an idea. He's gonna say that.
I love it.
Okay, now Jake, are you okay?
Yes. Thank you for asking. Are you
Excellent.
okay?
Yeah, I'm great. I'm really good. This week was Are You Okay Day Week. And
Day Week, yep.
Yeah, and I think it was on Wednesday.
I think so, yeah.
And our workplace was great. They put up all the posters and all that sort of stuff. Now, I can be a bit of a jerk sometimes, Jake. I'll admit it.
Noticed.
Yeah. And so sometimes what I do things that I think are really funny, and they're not really funny. But one of the things I did this week, which I thought was funny, and I think other people thought it was pretty funny too, was that I actually took the flow chart, the Are You OK Day flow chart from the poster board, and I brought it down with me because what the flow chart does is it basically gives you a roadmap for a conversation. To have with someone at your workplace about, whether or not they're feeling okay and what you can do about it. So I was a bit of a smart aleck and I sat in the staff room with the flow chart and then went around and asked everyone if they're okay and followed the roadmap. Now, I thought that this would be quite funny. However, I ended up having some really, really good conversations. Thank you. Thank you. Look, see, this is why I'm okay. There we go. I'm replacing the Pure Spring 7-Eleven water with Nook Restaurant.
I'm going to assume that she's on camera, but you've got the robot background on, so hello.
It just appeared for you. So I'm sitting there with the staff members, and I had the roadmap out there, and I've got to be honest with you, I had some really good conversations out of it. Some people were better than others. Most people were obviously pretty good, but it was just interesting to have that conversation. Because I think it broke the ice a little bit. I think because obviously I didn't, like if it ended up being a bit of a serious conversation, I didn't purely stick to the roadmap. But there were a couple of things missing from the roadmap, I thought. One of the main things I think is missing from the roadmap is you actually volunteering to help the person. It's a bit offloady in the sense that it's like, if you're not okay, what do you think you can do about that? Not let's go and have a drink, or do you want to go for a bushwalk on the weekend and talk about it? Do you want to do something? It's a bit like they sort of really leave you out of it, which I think is okay because obviously people who work with other people sometimes don't want to mingle on the weekends and stuff like that. But it's a bit like if you're not okay, go and talk to a psychologist. It's basically where it heads you. But and then the very last bubble says. Let's chat about this again next week.
No, I'm sorry. Are You Okay Day isn't until next year.
That's right.
We'll put a pin into it until next year.
I just love the idea of someone actually said, no, I'm not okay. I'm really struggling. And you go, oh, okay. What are you going to do about that? And let's chat about that again next week.
Yeah. Let's talk about your progress
Yeah.
on the actions that you have committed to in this random conversation.
Yeah. It is a little bit of a coaching conversation. It's a little bit coachy for those of you who are coaches amongst us. It's a little bit of a coaching conversation rather than an actual genuine conversation.
Yeah, but sometimes that's okay. There's nothing wrong with a blueprint to help people to have difficult conversations, because that's, we do often avoid. Our culture is absolutely set around that whole premise of, we're not going to talk about the thing that we're talking about. We're going to talk about the opposite of that. How you going? Not bad. You can
that's a really good point. It is. I think that's a really good point. I don't disagree with that. I think it is a real shame that is how we sort of have our conversations. I was actually thinking about
saying that we can't have proper, conversations
No.
as well. But those conversations, like they're often there. And I'm sorry, I just interrupted you as you were about to have a profound thought. But it is just part of the Aussie nature that we often have that sort of larrikin response. Starting off with a conversation stopper. How you going? Not bad. The rest is up to you.
Yeah.
Probe further. No, okay, we're gonna leave it there. How you going? Not bad. All right, good convo.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, and I think that to a certain extent, part of the way that I sort of have dealt with that in the past, if I'm actually not okay, is to sort of wait for the person to continue on the conversation to see if they're actually genuinely interested in how I'm going, or whether or not it was just a passing comment on their part. Obviously when you're younger, you sort of think to yourself, oh, imagine if you sort of opened up to the cashier at Woolworths when they asked you how you're going, and you just said, well, look, I'm having a really massive existential crisis. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm depressed. I've got all these things going on, blah, 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 blah. Everything's cancelled. I'm so sad. As if you're going to do that, you just put this massive burden onto the other person. So I think, figuring out when you're having a genuine conversation about are you okay and what you can do about it is a bit nuanced as well. You don't sort of want to be the person who's just launching into the fact that they're confused about life and everything's a bit rubbish,
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Also, I do know people who have those sorts of conversations with the checkout person at Woolworths, and I may have married them. And it's always an interesting thing because, as a consequence, I go to the checkout and I load the wheel of the.
You load the wheel,
the conveyor belt thing,
right?
What I meant, yeah.
I like that. I like the idea of calling it load the wheel.
I load the wheel, and then the checkout person asks invariably my wife, how you going? And then she says it, at which point I move around from the wheel onto the area where the plastic bags are filled,
right,
in order to avoid the remainder of that conversation. And at some point, the checkout person looks up at me, looks me in the eye as if to say, what have I know what you're
doing. I know what you're doing.
Done? Why did I ask this person this question at this time?
I see what you said. Yeah. Look, and you know what? It's a bit of a risk, isn't it? It's a risk you take when you ask someone how they're going, that you might be burdened with some of their burdens themselves.
It is part of the social contract as an Australian that you are obliged to say not bad.
Yeah, that's right. It is a bit of a social contract. And I think that the Are You OK Day is probably a way to push that conversation in a different direction, which I think is really good. Having said that, a lot of people are at work on Are You OK Day, and a lot of people aren't okay because of their workplaces. So, the question is really what do you do in those situations? And I've been thinking about this a lot lately because, I've been in some pretty tricky workplaces myself. And I think when you are in a tricky workplace and if you're not feeling great, depending on the workplace, actually admitting that you're not doing well and that you're not happy with certain things that are happening in the workplace can actually be pretty detrimental to the whole situation. So, I think you have to have some alternatives to even going down the path of making, maybe not complaints, but making comments at work or dealing with it internally or anything like that. Like, going to see those external specialists, going to talk to other people in your family, all that sort of stuff. And if it's really bad, trying to figure out a roadmap for how you get out of that workplace without burning bridges, because if you end up working in the same sort of field and you've burnt your bridges, or you've said some things that some people in a different hierarchy to you didn't like, that can be detrimental to you getting another job in another workplace as well. So I think there is an element. I'm not saying that everyone should do this, and it certainly shouldn't be the case in workplaces. However, it's not all swings and roundabouts. I don't even know if that's the right one. It's not all twirls and tiaras. And I think it's
both of them.
I think in some workplaces, I think there is an element to just sort of shove it down a little bit, talk to someone who's not involved in that workplace, and try and figure out a roadmap out of there. While talking to those people, so you've got a bit of an outlet during that time that you're having a little bit of inner turmoil. What do you think of that?
I couldn't agree more. It's always, particularly when you're struggling, it's always good to include or seek help from an impartial, external advisor. So, a psychologist is the classic example.
Yeah.
Someone from HR in a larger workplace, or a peer in a smaller workplace, if that's appropriate or possible. Seeking assistance from someone. If you are struggling, you should be perfectly fine to reach out for help.
Yeah.
It is just one of those things. And while I was joking about the whole social contract of the Australian answering with the conversation closer, essentially, when how are you going, or are you okay, is meant to be a conversation opener. It is one of those things that we invariably could be doing better. We could be doing better to open conversations, to assist our friends, to assist our peers, because a rising ocean lifts all boats. It's one of those things that when
what? Hang on, a rising ocean lifts all boats.
The rising tide lifts all boats. It's one of those when the mood improves amongst the workplace. When you talk to everyone, when you lift the mood of the individuals within that workplace, or within that family, or within that cohort, whatever it happens to be, improves the productivity, the output, the outcomes, etc. It invariably improves the cohesion of that group of people.
Yeah, and I think there's an element to waiting as well. Because you can have really bad days, or a string of really there's a string. You can have a bad day or a string of bad days, and in which case, sort of launching into with your boss or with some workers about how terrible the workplace is, or something like that. You might have deep regrets about that. Down the track too, I suppose. Yeah, I think that's probably one of the main sort of awakenings I've had in my adult life is that idea of, sometimes when you do open up about the problems in the workplace that are happening, that can actually be pretty detrimental to you. So in those not perfect workplaces, which, I mean, if you're not happy, like you've said, it's probably not a perfect workplace to start with. So Yeah, but I mean, it is one of those things, and we're getting very deep on the warm up. So I'd consider us pretty, relatively warm. But it is one of those things that, you do need to consider a number of factors, including whether you have influence, within the workplace to improve the situation yourself, or whether you have the power to influence the people around you to assist in influencing the change in the workplace that would make your life better. But likewise, it could easily be, and I don't mean to say, hey, the problem's not with the workplace, it's with you, but it is one of those things that whenever you are having difficulty, wherever that difficulty happens to be experienced, it's a great opportunity to look inside and, because you can't, quite often you can't change a situation that's occurred, right? But you can change your perception about it. You can change your reaction to it. You can change your feelings and emotions around it. So is there an opportunity to look at yourself and look at how you're reacting and look at whether your reaction is appropriate? Is it an occasion where you could actually go out and seek, some assistance, some counselling, some psychologist assistance? And that's the benefit in seeking sort of the impartial external, not necessarily emotional advisor. Yeah.
Because they are sort of able to remove the situation-specific emotion from it, and provide you with impartial advice on how you might improve your reaction, and B, set forward some strategies, some tactics to improve that situation into the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the real key, right? Is to be seeking that external assistance, whether it's through a psychologist or whether it's going to see your GP to get those mental health plans going. We do really have some great structures in place. Having said that, during a coronavirus pandemic, we know that psychologists
mental health is a huge thing,
and psychologists are few and far between, in the sense that they're all pretty booked out. So, anyway, it's worth a shot, and it's certainly worth talking to someone. Because how often do you just sort of have an hour just to shut the door and have a conversation with someone in a way that lets you? I suppose the irony is we do this every week. For most people, when do you just sit down for an hour and have those conversations? Because I think an hour in figuring out your thoughts and getting your thoughts out there, really just like you sort of walk around with a bit of a weight off your shoulder, I think.
Yeah, I could not agree more. But it highlights, and this is the advantage of Are You OK Day, and the history of Are You OK Day is. Always makes me tear up. I don't know whether you've seen there was an Australian story some years ago. ABC might have been also a Four Corners report on it. The individual who started it had metastatic cancer, so it was going from different organs in his body to other organs, spreading what you'd refer to as stage 4 cancer, where it's metastasizing and prognosis is not great. He'd had a couple of treatments, and he was not feeling so great about it, and he instituted Are You OK Day. He started sharing it with his friends. He started sharing it with his workplace. He started this charity, Are You OK Day, and unfortunately he passed away. But the legacy is this premise of Australians starting to have these conversations about, hey, we all have tough times. We all have tough times, and right now is one of those tough times that, many multiples of human beings in this country and around the world are having tough times. So it is such an important time to reflect on the fact that it's okay to have a conversation, with your peers, with your friends, with your family. Open up dialogue and do what you can do. Mental health is so freaking important. So, start thinking about it and start vocalizing it, because, the worst thing that you could do is, to improve, to start an open dialogue, to start getting things off start getting that weight off your shoulders.
Yeah. One of the best things you can do. Absolutely. I think that
I said worst. I meant best.
Yeah,
sorry.
That's all right. I don't disagree with anything you said. I think it's really important. And I suppose there's, like I said, there's that element of figuring out when you're having a genuine conversation about whether someone's okay or not, and what the timings for those particular conversations as well. Yeah. Now, Jake, speaking of mental health, this week all eyes have been on Victoria. All eyes have been on Daniel Andrews for the last 1,400 days or something.
Yeah.
And that they've released their, so I don't know, it's almost like the almost as anticipated as the new Midnight Oil reunion, according to our YouTube views. The roadmap.
Yes, the roadmap out of lockdown.
Yeah, roadmap out of lockdown. It sounds like it should have its own theme song, doesn't it?
It actually should be a Midnight Oil album. The roadmap out of lockdown.
Roadmap out of lockdown. Yeah. Okay. So this is really interesting. It's been fascinating watching the ebbs and flows of everyone's sort of opinions about it. And in this particular case, opinions really don't matter too much, I guess, because it's all about the facts. But let's start with the distinction between the fact that there's two separate roadmaps here. There's a roadmap for Melbourne.
Yes.
And there's a roadmap for regional Victoria.
Yeah, well, so this is and you're so right to point out the important distinction there, because Melbourne is where the vast majority of Greater Melbourne, I should say, is where the great majority of coronavirus community transmissions have been taking place. When you see those large numbers, when you see those huge numbers, they are coming from major metropolitan centres.
Yeah.
Whereas the regional Victoria, they're having, essentially the end goal that was set out there, where coronavirus restrictions could be lifted, which is essentially an average of no more than 5 cases per day for over a fortnight.
Yeah, that was huge.
That's essentially where regional Victoria is at. They're at an average of 4 cases per day, I think, for over a fortnight now.
Okay.
So technically, they're pretty well on the cusp of being able to do it. Now, that's a technical statement and not necessarily the actuality, because it was noted last week that none of these restrictions are actually going to start easing until September 28th. So it is one of those things that even though regional Victoria is, essentially they've met the criteria to ease on the restrictions, they won't be easing restrictions until around September 28th, unless, something changes. And it is possible that something will change. I think the average has been for the last week and a bit, under 50 cases per day in across Victoria, but again, the vast majority of those cases where transmission is being acquired in the community are in that sort of greater metropolitan Melbourne, and very few in regional. So it's a really interesting thing. A lot of the commentary has been, I would say, scathing, and I'd say that that's probably being nice. We've seen public health experts, epidemiologists who also happen to be, federal Liberal National Party members. Huge number of experts, as well as commentators, being extremely critical about. I suppose what they've referred to as rather draconian, rather slow, slow-moving actions to get Victoria out of these lockdowns. And that has a lot to do with the fact that it is designed to be extremely cautious, and essentially extremely slow moving. So it is meant to be one of those things that very slowly retracts the restrictions, and is constantly doing this repetitive loop of hey, we're on the cusp now of moving forward. Should we move forward? What do our case numbers say? They have an evolving model, something that you're able to continuously plug in numbers and give you predictions based on those numbers. But so it is a very safe move, but I suppose a huge amount of the commentary has been about, hey, they've been in lockdown for almost hard lockdown, the stage 4 restrictions, for almost 2 months. Yeah. It's massive, and it's going to be in for another, several weeks. Business owners, the Business Council, even unions have been extremely critical about the fact, look, we just want to get outside. We just want to open our workplaces.
Yeah, look, I think it's easy to be critical, right? Obviously, because you're not the person making the decisions, or you're not part of the group making those particular decisions. I think it's really easy to be critical. I think that for the extreme criticisms that I've heard, have been around the fact that if New South Wales had the same sort of conditions as what Victoria has at the moment, then New South Wales would actually be in lockdown. We would be in a lockdown situation ourselves, and also that the modelling hasn't really been released to the public around that. I don't know how true that is, because I've seen a few websites that have said this is the modelling that they used. So I don't know how true.
Been released early on, and there was a lot of media comments. So when the roadmap was released, there was a couple of journalists who, look, this is what you actually want of journalists. They said, isn't it appropriate, Premier Andrews, that you release the modelling that shows that this is the right way forward?
Yeah.
Right? Isn't it appropriate that you show the public this is why we are doing this? Not just that we are doing this and this is our way out, but specifically this is why we are doing this. And as a consequence, I think they did release that modelling.
Okay, so the modelling has been released, which is good, and because we certainly don't want to be patronised during this time. We don't want to be so. Well, you guys aren't smart enough to understand it or anything like that. I know I'm not smart enough to understand it, but that's not the point. I want the people who are smart enough to understand it to explain it. I know there's been a lot of criticisms about it. He seems to be, I think there was an element of, well, yes, this is pretty full on. This seems pretty draconian. However, if he's flexible during this time, then we'll sort of be okay with it. And I think that he's proving himself to be, Dan is proving himself to be pretty flexible with this situation. Yep. I think he's proving himself to say, look, if I've heard it correctly this morning on the news, he's actually saying as early as next week we could reconsider bumping up some of these cases because the cases are so low at the moment, like you pointed out. I think that criticism has been, heard, and I think that they're trying to, move on with some of those sort of leapfrogging of the restrictions. I also sort of, look, there's obviously clearly some politics in play here, especially with Scott Morrison and all that sort of stuff. I would say if he was a Liberal member, I don't think that there would be anywhere near as much criticism as what's been coming out, but they do have to be careful with their criticisms because they also don't want to be responsible for saying, well, you should relieve all of these, all of the restrictions that you've put on everyone and then lead to a third wave right before Christmas. I mean, we know that the economy would just be crushed. We know that the next couple of months are absolutely critical for so many businesses, including small businesses, which means it's critical for younger people, critical for women who are on the, who are in all these flexible workplaces and have these flexible working hours. We know that this is absolutely critical these next couple of months for the economy in general and for people's well-being in general as well. So I think that's, it's an interesting move to sort of come out and say, well, hang on, it's a bit draconian or anything like that. At this stage, I think that he's trying to do the best that he can, or the team of people are trying to do the best that they can to make sure that everything happens before Christmas, which is a tremendously important time for us this time of year.
Yeah, I do think as much as it is interesting, and we'll go into some more border commentary down further in this episode. But it is really interesting, the interplay between the Liberal Prime Minister and the Labor premiers. Yeah. To your point, I'm not actually sure that a Liberal Premier would shut down. I mean, when you sort of look at the way that Gladys Berejiklian reacted to the Sydney, I wouldn't call it a second wave because it was really just so well contained versus
sure was.
But it really
Go
was.
team.
It really was. Versus, the Victorian response where you just had that, maximal response and maximal proliferation throughout the community. But yeah, look, it is one of those interesting things. The way that this interplay between the Prime Minister and other ministers, such as goodness me, what's Peter Dutton? Peter Dutton and other ministers just really laying into the Labor premiers across Australia.
Yeah, that's not something I'd really considered. What other options would they have if they actually had a Liberal government in there? That would be interesting to find that out. Have a little bit of a side, an alternative universe where we could run that experiment.
It's actually interesting that you say that, Greg,
because there's a video game coming out called Coronavirus Lockdown.
The Liberal opposition leader for Victoria has released some alternative modelling, an alternative roadmap.
What do you know any of the details of that one?
No, but they have. They have essentially they're calling for they're calling for Victoria to move into stage 3 almost immediately and start scaling back, because essentially the numbers now are so much less.
Okay, see, and that to me sounds like a political game, because he's already come out and said that he would be flexible around that. So, you know, for them to come out and say this, and if he does actually move on that, they get to say, well, we suggested it, blah, 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 blah. So I don't know. It's a bit of a tricky one. I would hate to be in either situation at the moment. I'd hate to be in the opposition's, seat, and I'd hate to be in the actual seat making, well, I don't know if I'd hate to be, but, it certainly would be challenging.
It's such a rock and a hard place, seriously, because you open up and all of a sudden coronavirus is back. It's knocking on your door.
Yeah.
And you are then obliged for a number of different reasons to then lock down again. But you've just opened up. So all of those people that have gone back to work and have tried to be, productive citizens of the community now have to close down their businesses again, lay off their workers. I understand exactly, to a reasonable extent, I understand the strategy behind Dan Andrews really pushing for 0 cases or as close to as possible, because it would have been already so demoralizing when they had to shut down for this second wave, particularly in terms of consumer confidence, business confidence in Victoria. And, look, we're talking from our position of privilege with, we're only allowed 10 people at the moment around in Queensland, but that's still vastly better than not being able to go to our workplace, not being able to do exercise greater than 5 kilometres away, et cetera. It's pretty. They're pretty onerous restrictions at the moment in Victoria, but rock and a hard place.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, a shout out to a few people that we know in Melbourne. We know the boys from the Politics Over Coffee. Politics Over Coffee are in lockdown still. So shout out to them, and a shout out to my auntie Jan and my cousins Penelope and Jeffrey, all in lockdown down there. I think that they sometimes listen to the Pouch podcast. So hello, and we hope you're sane. Are you okay?
Yeah. We're not allowing dialogue back to us though.
No, and Pete is down there as well, isn't he?
He is, yeah. As
Pete Smisson,
my godfather and his partner Grant and Stephen. There are lots of lockdown arenas. Yeah. Look, they'll have to get together and talk about how amazing the pouch is once all of these restrictions are distance, an appropriate
subside.
Distance.
Yeah. All right, Jake, some great news around this. I've found this story so fascinating for so long. Now, this is about the Aboriginal flag in Australia. The Aboriginal flag in Australia has a sordid history in terms of ownership. And from my understanding, the last thing that I heard was about the fact that the Aboriginal flag couldn't be used at a particular AFL game because it was owned, the rights were owned by a sporting group or something like that, and they couldn't actually reach an agreement to get the flag up and running for this particular sporting event. Now, since then, and I only caught wind of this on another podcast, just really slight, it was a really slight comment. They said, the government is trying to get ownership back. The government is trying to buy back ownership of the Aboriginal flag. So, I thought we better put this into the show because it's a fascinating topic and one which I think our listeners would be really interested in. I'm certainly interested in it. Tell us what's happening at the moment with this flag and who owns it and what's happening and, can I use it at my next sporting event?
Well, possibly, but
which will be in 2040.
2040, exactly. So the Aboriginal flag was, or the National Indigenous flag was created by the Lauritja artist. There we go.
Yep.
Harold Thomas. And so he retains and owns, and his trust owns that flag.
Okay.
So that is the number one point to make there. His rights to ownership of the flag remain with him and his trust.
Right.
Recently, before I go into the recently stuff, in the past, Mr. Thomas has granted access to flag makers, to souvenir businesses, but more recently to a clothing manufacturer, Wham Clothing.
Right.
And, they have essentially since, getting access to this license have wanted to essentially maximize on their intellectual property rights and their they wanted to maximise the amount of money that they could make off this acquisition of these.
Of being able to say yay or nay to who can use the flag.
That's it. And so they've been sending a whole bunch of cease and desist letters to places like sporting codes, like very recently, as you mentioned, the AFL Indigenous round was considering do we have the Aboriginal flag or not during this major Indigenous round.
They decided not to as well.
They decided not to, exactly. Yeah. And it was all around the fact that they couldn't reach an agreement. So it was probably twofold. Number one was that they couldn't reach an agreement with WAM Clothing, who holds the rights at the moment. But the second part of that is they didn't want to have to pay for the use of the Aboriginal flag. And this started a whole campaign around the Free the Flag movement. Trying to get government agencies essentially to acquire or to demand acquisition of the rights of the flag from Harold Thomas. So look, it's a really interesting thing. The fact is that it is a national icon. It is something that a large number of the Indigenous population identify with, so it is one of those things that and a lot of politicians, a lot of media activists, and indeed, a lot of media activists, a lot of media and activists have been saying essentially, this is the flag that we identify as a people. We need to bring this back within the Australian fold. This should not be something that is at the this should not be something that is a commercial activity. And on the other hand, you've got a bunch of the people that are in power, at least federally at the moment, the Liberal National Party, who do have this sort of the free market philosophy behind them, that they don't want to compulsorily acquire the flag, and instead they've said that they're going to start working on the acquisition, the purchase of the flag. So that it can be used for personal and non-commercial purposes into the future.
Okay, all right. So it might be like a bit of a joint sort of licensing agreement sort of thing. Yeah, I think it's interesting because I don't think many people think of a flag being able to be owned by someone, right? Like you don't think of someone. It'd be interesting to contrast this with the rights of the Australian flag and when you're allowed to use that, and the rights of the Indigenous flag and when you're allowed to use that, and who you have to contact for it, and all that sort of stuff. I don't think people see flags as something that you can particularly own, or that you're not allowed to use it for certain events or something like that. Like a flag, it almost goes against the idea of having a flag and having something that visual that represents, what we stand for as a nation. So,
and I suppose that is because. In most cases, when you think of for example, a national flag, that national flag is held by the country, held by essentially the people. And the example is the clothing brand. What's the rugby brand?
CC, the Canterbury.
Yeah, Canterbury. So
the Canterbury Clothing Company.
Canterbury Clothing Company. So it's a New Zealand brand.
Yeah, right.
But when they, when they put the Australian flag on there, particularly for things like the Wallabies, etc., which our national rugby union team, they have to purchase the rights to to use that flag from the Australian government. And there's government departments set up to do exactly that. The difference here is that the clothing brand, WAM, and other people who want to access the rights of this of this flag are currently having to go to a member of the public, an individual, or who has set up a company around
like a private enterprise.
A private enterprise. Thank you. Yeah. So interesting statement from WAM Clothing this week, who said that it was not quote not stopping.
I was going to start singing a Wham song, but
last Christmas. No. Too early for Christmas. No. Quote,
don't get me started on that. Yeah.
They said, quote, it was not stopping Aboriginal people or the community from using the flag for personal use, but when it was used on clothing for commercial reproduction, then we need to talk. So
Right.
look, makes a lot of sense,
Yeah.
but it is just one of those things. It is potentially not in the national interest to have this in private ownership. So it is one of those things that'd be good to bring into the fold, to make it Australian in all ways.
Oh, I like that, Jake. We can't end better than that. Make it Australian in all ways. That's perfect. All right, so we know, Jake, that the border situation has become a bit heated. We know that last week there was a lot of talk about the federation is in tatters, and from my perspective, it's been really interesting to think about Australia as a federation. Right, I've just always thought of Australia as Australia. To think about it as separate states that have actually come together to form Australia, and that at some point, maybe not right now, but at some point into the future, this federation could actually be more fractured than what it is at the moment. So tell us what's happening at the borders at the moment, and how that relates to the federal government as well.
Well, this is such an interesting case, and it's bisected, if you will, by a really tragic event.
Okay.
To sort of start it off, and this is really about Queensland determinations around what we do with people that come into Queensland, and how they are, I suppose, for want of a better term, treated once they come into Queensland from a quarantine type of perspective.
Yeah.
So the rule is essentially, if you come from another part of Australia that is designated as a hotspot area, and if you come from internationally, you must quarantine for 2 weeks.
Yeah. Yep.
And as part of that, at the end of the 2 weeks, you're tested, and if you don't come up positive for COVID-19, then essentially you're allowed out, with the same restrictions that encumber everybody else in Queensland.
Yep.
We've had recently a series of AFL players come into Queensland. They've had to quarantine. People have remarked that how dare they be able to quarantine in a resort? Well, the program's called hotel quarantine. So hotel quarantine, resort quarantine, it doesn't really matter.
What's the difference? Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And they've got a whole bunch of restrictions around them, as well as they have COVID marshals. There is a whole army of COVID marshals that the AFL have paid for in order to enable that. And this is all around the premise that Queensland has been granted the AFL Premiership. They'll be playing the two teams whomever they are. I have no idea who they are, but they'll be playing in Wollongabba at the Gabba in the coming weeks. And there was also the case of Tom Hanks, who travelled over here earlier on. He was one of the early faces of COVID because
I remember. He was filming on the Gold Coast or something like that, and he ended up getting COVID-19. Him and his wife.
He's doing a Baz Luhrmann film about the early life of Elvis Presley. So of course he's filming in Queensland, which makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. Anyway, as part of that, regardless of the fact that he actually had coronavirus very early on, he has also been forced to quarantine for 2 weeks while while that occurs, and then he's able to go on and produce that film. There's a whole bunch of people surrounding that film, executives, etc., that are also doing the same thing. They've come into Australia. They're being forced to quarantine. There's quarantine marshals everywhere. And at the end of that, they'll be able to go on and make their film. And as part of that, there are all sorts, once they're actually able to get out of that and play the AFL, or once they get out of the quarantine and they're able to record the movie, there are COVID marshals all around the place in order to ensure that if somebody gets it or if someone's detected of it, they'll be quarantined for a further period, and production might shut down or pause or whatever it happens to be. I'm simply setting up that premise to say that there are appropriate precautions set up around this to ensure that if COVID is detected, it is not given the opportunity to proliferate around the community.
Yes.
Now we have this, really unfortunate, really heartbreaking case of a man who had cancer who recently died of cancer, and his daughter, Sarah Kasip, who was living in Canberra in Australia's Capital Territory, travelled to Queensland and was under hotel quarantine. But prior to the end of that 2-week stint, her father died.
Right.
And the funeral was booked, and a viewing of her father's body was arranged while she was still in hotel quarantine. And this was a case where I always you hate to be the one that points out that this is politicizing a death, but that's exactly what happened, and it was really heartbreaking to see the, Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk pointed out that she felt that she was being bullied and intimidated by
Scott Morrison
and by Peter Dutton, the Home Affairs Minister, over essentially this, this case of preventing this woman, this girl, from going to see her father, who had died, to going to view his body and going to attend the funeral. And to politicize that is, as the Premier said it, it's disgusting and disgraceful. And I can't think of a better way to put it. It was politicizing a tragedy. And that was just shocking. But essentially, what the reason why they were saying that, or the reason why the Prime Minister, the reason why the Home Affairs Minister were politicising it, to their point, is that there is this hypocrisy over the AFL players that are allowed in, they're allowed to mingle, amongst themselves within their resort quarantine as opposed to hotel quarantine. Tom Hanks was allowed to do his quarantine at a private residence, and was allowed to go within that private residence outside of the normal hotel quarantine arrangements. So yes, you would have to suggest that there is some amount of hypocrisy here, and in fact, there is some suggestion that there is potentially some relaxation of regulations around those individuals because of the economic potential of having the AFL and of having the movies occur. But it is one of those things that they are still being held in quarantine. They are still being required to quarantine. This this woman, as harrowing as the situation is, and as sad as the situation is, she was in quarantine because she had been, she had come from Canberra into Queensland, and it's so unfortunate that her father died during that time. But it's not the first case of somebody, passing away and individuals not being able to make it to the funeral or make it there before the person died. During the nationwide quarantine, or during the nationwide shutdown, there was a severe restriction on the number of people that were allowed to attend funerals. In Queensland, that number has been increased slightly, but it is still, we are still under restrictions that mean that COVID is not given the opportunity to proliferate. And invariably, the Prime Minister was the one early on who designated funerals as very high risk situations, as very high risk events, and that is because it is one of those events where people are crying, very emotional quite often. There's lots of hugging. You want to comfort people around you,
yes.
And invariably, it's very difficult to maintain social distancing in those types of situations, and that's very understandable. And it's it was harrowing to see this woman see her father dressed in full PPE, and she did attend the funeral while in full PPE, but It was just such an unfortunate situation. And, it is, as several commentators have said, it was Morrison's job during the National Cabinet last week to negotiate on the definition of hot zones in order to enable states and territories to be more selective about who they admit, who they choose to quarantine, and who they decide to perhaps turn back. So it is one of those things that it is probably not fair for the Prime Minister and others to be targeting the Premier for being consistent on a law. When that law or those laws are set up to protect the greater public. There is no question of that this was a harrowing case and that this was unfortunate and it's not fair, but it's not the only case, and it is all around the premise of we need to keep the public safe.
Yeah, that's right. I suppose that's where the fairness comes into it, isn't it? Some of the confusion might lie in the fact that, Queensland has tremendously low cases. Apparently, you guys recorded 3 new cases yesterday. And Stephen Miles, who's the Deputy Premier, is that right?
Yep.
And so he's accused the Prime Minister of leading what he claims is a planned and orchestrated attack on Anastasia Palaszczuk over the state's refusal to allow the Canberra woman to leave hotel quarantine in Queensland to attend her father's funeral. He mentions Scott Morrison, Peter Dutton and Matthias Cormann, and he's just about every bloke in federal politics has come out and attacked Miss Palaszczuk. And he said that it takes its toll. He says those 3 blokes, none of them are known for their compassion. They just pile it on, and people can judge them for that. He has ever cried about the hundreds of people who died in aged care under his watch. He has ever cried about the Ruby Princess, which saw people spread right through the country with COVID-19. Does he cry right now the tens of thousands of Australians stranded overseas and unable to return home? So there are elements of this being politicised. There are elements of this, that we're not, what does he say? We're all in this together. And it seems like we're all in this together up to a point. So, what is that point? And, how much of this is designed for politics and how much of this isn't designed for politics? I think, if you're a premier at the moment, you've got to make some really tough choices. And those tough choices will come at the consequence for people, suffering personally as well, which is a real tragedy. But like you say, keeping those numbers down is essential, as Queensland has proven, as the modelling has proven. Keeping those numbers down is absolutely essential. And we know the difference that one person can make. We know the difference that one case can make to being spread across the community. So, sticking to those rules is pretty important. Whether or not there's time, whether or not there's even the resources to be able to process these things on a case-by-case basis at the moment. I imagine they're getting, thousands of different requests every day. So it's a very challenging situation for all those involved.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more.
Meanwhile, a Labor backbencher has apologised after News Corp published a photo of him apparently flouting social distancing rules in July at his 40th birthday party. Stretton MP Duncan Pegg attended a restaurant with a COVID-safe plan and says a belly dancer inadvertently pulled him to his feet. Opposition leader Deb Franklington seized on the incident, saying Year 12s were not allowed to dance at formals, but yet a Labor MP can belly dance at his 40th birthday. I think that's particularly galling. So politics well and truly outplayed, despite the fact that they never play politics.
No, well, we are in the lead up to an election in Queensland, so invariably there will be some amount of this tit for tat, if you like. But we'll hopefully it's not too many of these low blows, because they are, not entirely productive, and they're rife with opportunities to point out hypocrisy on both sides. It's always unfortunate when people go for the low blow instead of, let's compare policy.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Now, Jake, it would be remiss of us to not talk about koalas this week. You happy to dive into that one a little bit?
100%.
All right.
Shallow wade.
Let's do the shallow wade. Hit the shallow wade music. Shallow wade. Now, We've got so koala now. I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to say that Friendly Geordies is a particularly active person in this particular regard. He's the one who has instigated. Him and his team of people and his army of followers have instigated over the last few months the hashtag koalakiller for Gladys Berejiklian, and sort of saying, she due to the fact of all this land clearing, particular populations of koalas are at risk, particularly here in New South Wales, where there's only a limited number of thriving populations. Yeah, thriving populations. And it's certainly endangered down here. So koalakiller has been hashtagged and trending on Twitter for a long time, thanks to Friendly Geordies and his particular army of followers. And this week it all sort of started to come into the mainstream media a little bit, didn't it? Tell us a little bit about what's happening here. It's got John Barilaro. I love a bit of John Barilaro. He's a Barilaro laughs.
You know that John Barilaro loves a bit of John Barilaro too. Look, it's really interesting. This is all around the state environmental planning policy.
Yep.
And essentially, there are provisions within the state environmental planning policy, which I'll refer to herein or heretofore as the SEP. Because it's so it just sounds so great. The SEP.
It does. The SEP rolls off the tongue.
Yeah, it sure does. Except for the P. It's a really hard P.
Yeah. Well, there's no tongue in P.
That's true. Yeah. Anyway, so yes, it's such an interesting thing. So the SEP has some provisions in it that require for any time where a deforestation is likely to occur because of some form of development, that the deforestation must have some form of koala planning in it.
Yes.
Now, there's huge amount of misinformation, particularly created by the Nationals and by national sympathisers, by farmers groups, by development organisations around this topic. Suggesting, hey, for farmers you can't do your fencing, rebuilding. Not true.
Yeah, right.
If you're going to
sort of a bit of a doom and gloom situation, they're sort of painting this picture that everything's going to fall apart.
They're straw manning it to the extreme, and the straw man is not holding up. Yeah. So it's a really interesting thing. But essentially, it all came to a head. After essentially the Nationals have been debating the SEP for a significant amount of time, trying to remove these provisions around the koala. The koala planning studies that are being required as part of major developments. And it all came to a head this week when essentially John Barilaro, the Nationals leader, after meeting with his colleagues, said, look, we are not going, if this SEP seems to be going ahead and we don't like it, we are not for it. It is going to crush us. It is going to crush our voter base. We're not doing it. We are going to remove ourselves from the coalition, and we're going to go sit on the opposition. We're going to sit on the crossbench, and we are not going to vote on any legislation. We'll retain our seats and we'll retain our portfolios as ministers, as cabinet ministers, but we're not going to do anything for the coalition.
And then Gladys, she went and rolled out the big guns. She went stocked up. She was like Neo from the Matrix. She just opened up her coat and went, look at my weaponry, right? Well, I might rephrase that.
No, it was very good. Open up the coat filled with guns. And
filled with guns, and she called their bluff. She said, right, off you go.
She really did. She essentially said, look, I'm prepared to go into Government House. She actually made a booking at Government House for the next day to speak to the Governor General
next morning. She was like, you've got until Friday morning.
You've got until 9 a.m. Otherwise, I've booked an appointment to go and speak to Government House to swear in a new government. So it's up to you guys. If you're going to do this, if you're going to continue to play this line, we'll go and kick you out of your ministries. We'll go and sort out a new coalition, and look. Essentially, what you said is, we are too busy governing. We've got other more important things on our hands to deal with this feckless little stupidity. Yeah. And
Okay, so he's in a bit of trouble, right? I wouldn't be surprised if we end up having a conversation at the end of next week that there's no more John Barilaro, right? I wouldn't be surprised about that. Who knows how that's going to play out? But he certainly didn't do the Nationals any favor. Is he a National? Is that what he is?
Well, he's the leader of the National. He's also the deputy premier.
Premier, yeah. Yeah, he hasn't done their image any favors. I did a lot of comments this week about the fact that it was an odd hill to try and die on.
Which is a saying. I love that saying. I use that saying quite often
to your kids all the time.
No, not necessarily to my kids, but it's one because invariably when you do lots of negotiating, you do need to sort of what is the thing that you cannot go past? What is your upper limit in terms of your of the things that you can negotiate on? What is the hill that you are going to choose to die on? Is he going to choose to die on that hill? Yeah. Right. So it is one of those great sayings. But yeah, this is such an interesting case. But essentially, as soon as Gladys Berejiklian made this ultimatum, Barilaro backed down.
Yep.
Almost immediately, he was back in the fold on before 9 a.m. on Friday morning.
Yeah.
And it was all honky dory. Everyone was back in their happy faces.
Look, I do encourage you to check out Friendly Geordies in the sense of this koala killer situation. He has been instrumental in this whole situation of bringing these sort of policies and things to the forefront and letting you know about the MPs and things who are actually fighting for these koalas as well and making sure that expansions of quarries or buildings of quarries and things like that don't actually go ahead. Whether or not you like Friendly Geordies, that's totally on you, but he does certainly have some information which you might not get from the mainstream media. So I dare you to. Well, I'd just encourage you to check that one out.
I dare you to. I dare you to. I love it. Yeah, look, such an interesting case. I have heard some commentary in the media, unnamed sources, as they often
I love unnamed
often
sources
are in these cases, who have referred to John Barilaro's leadership as untenable.
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 That's some big words.
Yeah.
Some big words.
So
yeah, look, I don't know. He's a bit of an odd character. I've read a few articles about him. He's a bit of a chef, apparently. He likes to cook up some seafood and things like that. So when he does his interviews, you go to his house. But he does work very hard. We know that he's away from home for 200 days a year and all this sort of stuff. But it's so again interesting that you would work that hard and then not play along with the politics that you've chosen to play along with.
Or keep it in the party room.
Yeah,
like this is one of those things. The Nats are notorious for this. It's like it's a 6 monthly cycle. 6 months ago we were talking about how Barnaby had decided that it was time to do another challenge.
Yeah,
and gotten his mates together and he was ready to roll Michael McCormack.
Yeah.
And 6 months later we've got Barilaro, the Barilaro laughs, who's just decided, look, that's it. This is the hill that we're going to die on.
I know.
And
so bizarre.
And decided to roll essentially the coalition.
And even if it is about him, like even if it's about him and his ego, it's still just tremendously bad timing. Like even if it's just about getting noticed and getting some airtime and things like that, to do that at the moment while no one is talking about that in the media is such an odd thing. And if they are talking about it, this comes off the back of the bushfires where everyone was very koala focused and everyone was very much like, gosh, we need to make sure that we're rehabilitating these koalas and that we're looking after their habitats. To come out and say, well, look, we're actually not even going to worry about that and we want all these things to change is anyway.
And one thing I would like to say, because I live in regional Queensland and I do mix with a lot of country folk and it's not at all uncommon to have these types of conversations about land clearing, particularly farmers of graziers that own enormous swaths of land, and they do quite often feel that the laws that that the city people make are quite onerous and can invariably add to their expenses because of the things that they must do in order to just get their job done. They're making essentially the city folk are making their lives harder, more expensive, etc. Essentially for their own benefit. When it is the farmers that essentially have to bear the brunt of the legislation that's made. But it is one of those things that it's largely the misrepresentation of those laws that of the SEP, of the State Environmental Planning Policy, that was actually probably feeding the backlash against the SEP instead of the actuality of the actual legislation.
All right. Well, we'll keep everyone updated on whether or not we still have koalas this time next week. Koalas, whether or not we still have koalas or whether or not we still have John Barilaro laughs.
Exactly.
Now, Jake, we'll touch on this one really just quickly, and then I know we're busy people. But one thing that caught my eye this week, obviously, what's that?
You got to drink your coffee.
I've had my coffee from Nook Restaurant. I don't even know where Nook Restaurant is, but
big sponsors of the show.
They are now. I wonder if they'll give me a coffee every week if I say we'll sponsor them on the show. Now, look, this China situation. So I love this because everyone knows exactly what's going on, but no one's willing to admit it. So China's saying that there's no funny business going on, and Australia's going, nah, look, we're still really good friends with China. Neither of those things are true at the moment. So very interesting that China claims Australian journalists endangered security hours after others fled. Now, this has to do with Bill Birtles from the ABC correspondent, who was based in Beijing, and the Australian Financial Review's Mike Smith all of a sudden magically appeared in Australia, on Australian soil, and we're very chuffed about that. This comes on the back of...
We're not so chuffed.
I suppose like they've just lost their jobs, right?
It's the first time in almost 20 years that we haven't had a foreign correspondent. First time since the mid-1970s that we haven't had accredited Australian media journalists based in mainland China.
Okay, so why did they flee?
Well, it's really interesting. They were warned by the by DFAT, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and by the consulate that they were in trouble and that they should get out as not so much that they were in trouble, but that activities that they do, i.e., reporting on truth, may not be particularly advantageous for their existence as human beings who breathe and live. So essentially, they were warned, and they decided that they were going to get out of Dodge essentially as quickly as possible.
Yeah, now, why wouldn't you?
Exactly, and they were having Friday night drinks together as a group, and they got a knock on the door. And the knock on the door was from Chinese officials who said, we need you to come in and have a chat about a national security issue, to which they said, we're just going to go over here to the consulate.
Just going to go to the bathroom for a second.
Pretty much. They went almost immediately to the consulate, and they for want of a better term, hid out in the consulate. The consular officials negotiated with the Chinese officials on what essentially amounted to, once they had agreed to be interviewed as part of this, national security issue, that they would be allowed to leave China, because that was essentially what had happened at the end of that, party conversation was, if you don't come and see us, you are not allowed to leave China.
Yeah, and
that's what the Chinese officials did.
That's right. Now, this is off the back of this of another. I think she like an Australian journalist who was working over there,
Chung Lee,
right? So she is actually detained. She's not free at the moment. She's been detained, and no one really understands why. Yeah. So full-blown charges. So really, really scary stuff. And so these two journalists have made a really, really good choice, I think, in getting out of there. I know that Stan Grant, who's a very popular ABC journalist, I think he appears on some other stations as well, he actually has a really interesting history. I think he worked over in China for about 5 years. And he said that, over that time it changed from the fact that they were followed all the time, all that sort of stuff. They sort of had a bit more sort of freedom. Or no, they never used to have a lot of freedoms, and they got a little bit of freedom, but that came at the cost of being followed all the time. Sorry, but that if he had the choice, he would actually go back. He would still go back. It's still a fascinating place to be, despite all these risks, despite the fact that they're just detaining the journalists for no reason. So really, really interesting. So it was interesting to hear his commentary this week about the fact that what those changes have been and what those experiences are in China, and the fact that. Just the bullying that's happening. I mean, this bullying doesn't even seem to cut it as a word that is appropriate for this particular situation. It's really China flexing their muscles, and they've got some muscles to flex, unfortunately.
Yeah, they're way bigger muscles than the Australian muscles.
To a certain extent. Hey, I mean, we're slowly trying to wean ourselves off of China, which is obvious. But at the same time, none of our MPs can open up a dialogue with their Chinese counterparts.
Exactly.
We don't have reporters over there. The trade is becoming more and more difficult to deal with in China at the moment. We got all the increase in tariffs on wine, on barley, on all these sorts of things. It's tremendously obvious what's going on.
Because we raised questions about the coronavirus and how it was allowed to proliferate.
Yeah.
It's such an interesting and fascinating subject. Invariably, the Chinese people are in many ways a lot like the Australian people, by and large. They don't take themselves too seriously. They're good-humoured. They're wonderful people. It just seems that the Chinese government is creating a situation that is creating a tremendous amount of tension between the two countries. And,
certainly.
I'm not sure whether we're exacerbating it. Not sure what we could do to exacerbate it. But it's one of those things that is scary.
Yeah. Well, I think we're exacerbating it by not playing along, right? That's the whole thing. It's we're being very diplomatic in our responses as well. Which may come at the cost of jobs. It may come at the cost of exports and things like that. So very, it's a very nuanced game at the moment, and one that may have an impact on us for many years to come. I think it's one of the interesting outcomes from the coronavirus, really, isn't it? Because, we're not withdrawing. We're not changing our tune about this whole situation, about the investigation that's happening, nor should we. So I think that it's... it's really interesting. I mean, the China-Australia relationship really fascinates me, and it might be time we got in contact with Drew Pavlo again as well. He encouraged us to get in contact with him. He was the university student who ended up getting sort of suspended from his role, for speaking out against China influence on Australian universities. So really, really fascinating stuff. And once you dig deeper, I mean, people accuse Dan Andrews of being in China's pockets. People accuse Australian universities of being in China's pockets. We had the saga a little while ago where MPs, I think it was, were sort of involved in spying charges. I think there was a politician very recently who got investigated with his links to China. So there's really, really fascinating little stories that come up, fascinating in a scary way.
It is a scary thing, and it is one of those things that we need to consider this very carefully. Every step that we take in this particular area, we need to take very cautiously, because every step may come at the expense of Australian, security, as well as Australian trade, Australian prosperity, and various other things.
All right, Jake. Well, I don't know about you. I'm pouched out.
I'm pouched out too.
Whew. I'm ready to leap out of the pouch.
Yep.
It's back into the real world, whatever that is. I think it's staring at my computer for another 4 hours or something. Wanted to thank you for spending that time with me today. Once our listeners have finished going through their Wham back catalogue, what would you like them to do?
Yes, once they're done singing Last Christmas. Not a great song, but I suppose it's subjective.
Yeah. Out of all the things we've said, I bet you that will be the thing that we get a lot of emails.
That'll be the controversial thing. Yes, I'd love them to subscribe to us and rate and review, because if they rate and review, it genuinely helps us to become more prominent in iTunes and various other podcast aggregators, and help people to find us.
Yes, absolutely. We do love those podcast aggregators. And if you'd like to share the love, you can do so by telling your friends, families, and foes to head to thepouchthepodcast.com thepouchthepodcast.com, where they can choose their favorite podcast player of choice. And make sure that you please subscribe to our YouTube channel, because we're uploading every day at the moment, which is great. And Jake doesn't have any idea about any of that, so he'll be subscribing as well. You know, the thing that takes the longest on the YouTube channel is the thumbnails. The thumbnails are the thing that get me. Every single, like, I've got the audio, I've got the video, I've got the descriptions and the tags and all that sort of stuff, but having to upload a different thumbnail for each particular video is pretty full on. But thank you, Canva, huge sponsors of the show.
Yeah, thanks, Canva.
Thanks to Nook Restaurant, Pure Spring 7-Eleven Water, and Canva.
Yeah. Also, Audio Technica.
Yeah, and Audio Technica. And Jake, huge sponsor of the show.
I love it.
All right, and I will chat to you during the week, and thanks again for your time, hey? Love it.
Such a pleasure, Greg. Such a pleasure.
And fade to black.